The clink of champagne glasses still echoed as my son stepped onto the gala stage, grinning like I was a party favor. Still, I kept my smile frozen while he joked, "Let's start the bidding. $1 for my useless mom." As polite laughter scattered across the ballroom, I felt the spotlight burn hotter than his words ever could. While I stood there, humiliated in heels he'd bought for show, I remembered who taught him charm, and who taught me survival. The same crowd that once whispered behind my back now held its breath as a voice called out, 1 million. That's when he turned, face pale, smile gone, and saw the stranger I used to rock to sleep. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she folded the letter one last time. The weight of her layoff from the school, the reality of it all, seemed to sink deeper into her bones with every passing second. She had been a teacher for decades, decades that had defined her life. But now, the world felt different. The world felt cold. David was the first to speak, his tone already thick with frustration as he entered the room, his eyes scanning the letter in her hands. "So, that's it then? You've really lost your job?" His voice was tight, controlled, but the undertones of disbelief and anger seeped through. "How could you let this happen, Mom? You should have seen this coming. Everything's changing and you—" He paused, glancing at Lily, who stood at the counter, silent, but watching the scene unfold like a hawk. "I know, David," Martha said, trying to steady herself. "It was unexpected. I never thought they'd—" "Unexpected?" David interrupted sharply. "You've been in the same job for how long, Mom? You're practically a relic in this world. It's not surprising that they let you go. You're not keeping up with the times." He paced, rubbing his temple as if her misfortune was an annoyance to his own carefully constructed life. "I can't deal with this. I'm barely keeping things together myself, and now I have to worry about you too?" Lily turned, her expression cold. "David's right, Mom. You've always lived in your little bubble, letting everyone else take care of you. This. This is why I've been telling you to adjust. You've always expected us to do everything for you." She folded her arms tightly. "You can't just sit around anymore, expecting everyone to fix things for you." "I can't believe this is happening." Martha's chest tightened. It was as though the walls of the house, the one she had lived in for so many years, were closing in on her. She tried to steady her breathing. I wasn't prepared for this, but I'll figure it out. I always have." David's eyes narrowed. "Figure it out? What's that supposed to mean? You don't have the skills to get by on your own anymore. You've never had to." Lily's voice was sharp. "You need to move out, now. You can't stay here like this. We can't be responsible for you anymore." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She had always been the caretaker, the one who provided support, and now her own children were casting her aside as though she were some kind of burden. But it wasn't just their words. It was the tone, the lack of compassion, the absence of the love she had poured into them all these years. She felt invisible in their eyes. I never thought I'd hear you say that," she whispered, the sting of betrayal catching in her throat. David turned his back on her. "You need to go. We're serious. We can't afford to keep you here, Mom. It's time you figured things out for yourself." Lily didn't look at her mother. Instead, she began fiddling with her phone, as though Martha's presence had become nothing more than a distant inconvenience. "We're done here. Just pack your stuff and leave. I'll help you find a place. But not here." The room felt suffocating. Martha's body went numb. The woman who had given so much of herself, her time, her love, her care, was now being dismissed. The thought of asking for help, of pleading with them, felt foreign. She had never wanted to be a burden, but their cruel indifference stung like 1,000 needles. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady as she walked to the bedroom to pack her things. Every step she took felt like a small betrayal of herself. She folded her clothes, each piece reminding her of the life she had once had. The house, the home she had created for them, seemed to echo with the silence of her departure. As she loaded the last of her belongings into the trunk of her car, she couldn't shake the feeling of being erased from their lives. The things she had done, the sacrifices she had made, it all seemed meaningless now. They truly believed she was incapable of surviving without them. They thought she had nothing, but she did. She had something far more powerful than they could ever imagine. Martha slammed the trunk shut and stood for a moment in the driveway, her heart heavy, but a spark of determination starting to light within her. She wasn't broken. Not yet. She wouldn't let them define her. Her phone buzzed. Jenna's name appeared on the screen. She answered it with a shaky voice, the weight of the day pressing down on her. "Martha, where are you?" Jenna asked, her tone warm and concerned. "You okay?" "No," Martha replied quietly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But I will be. I need a place to stay. Can I come over?" "Of course," Jenna said immediately without hesitation. "You're welcome here. Anytime. We'll figure this out." Martha didn't say another word. She just drove, leaving behind the only home she had ever known, the place where her children had once played, now a distant memory of a life she couldn't return to. Martha sat at the kitchen table in Jenna's cozy little home, the weight of the world still pressing down on her shoulders. But the soft hum of the coffee machine and the quiet rustling of trees outside felt like a balm to her raw nerves. She had left her old life behind in the rearview mirror, but the reality of her new situation still hadn't quite settled. Her job was gone, her children had turned their backs on her, but there was something else, something she had been keeping to herself for years, that suddenly felt much more important. She took a deep breath, pulling out her phone and dialing the number she hadn't thought about in ages, Bradley Cooper, her old friend and lawyer. The familiar, reassuring voice on the other end of the line made her feel a little less alone. "Martha." "It's been a while," Bradley greeted warmly. "How's everything going?" Martha swallowed hard, her heart still heavy. "Bradley, I need your help. It's urgent." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of paper shuffling. "Of course. What's going on?" she explained, her words coming out in a rush. "I've lost my job, and I'm not sure where to turn. I've been thinking about the future, about what I have left. I need to make sure I'm taken care of. I can't count on my kids anymore, and I don't know how long I can keep this secret. But I have to know where I stand. I'm scared." Bradley's tone softened, his voice steady and professional. "I understand. We'll go through everything: assets, investments, savings. You've made some good choices over the years, Martha. You've been more careful than you think." Martha felt a small flicker of hope at his words. She had always trusted Bradley. He was the only person who knew about the small fortune she had quietly amassed over the years: money from inheritance, wise investments in real estate, and years of savings from teaching. Things her children had never known about. The world had always seen her as just a retired schoolteacher, struggling to get by. But the truth was, Martha was far more self-sufficient than anyone, especially her children, had ever realized. "I've never told anyone about what I've done. I never wanted them to know. They would just think I was hoarding it, trying to control them. But now I don't know what to do," Martha said, her voice shaky. Bradley's voice was calm, offering her the reassurance she needed. "Martha, this is your money. It's yours to do with what you wish. But you're right to be cautious. If you reveal everything now, it might cause more harm than good. You need to keep this under wraps. at least for the time being. Let's make sure everything is in order before you make any big moves." The words sank in, and for the first time in days, Martha felt a sense of control. She wasn't as helpless as she had thought. She wasn't just a woman who had been left behind, she was a woman who had prepared for this moment. She had options. Bradley continued, "We'll work out a plan, something that allows you to live comfortably and safely without involving your children. They don't need to know about your assets right now. You've worked hard for this, Martha. Let it work for you." Martha's chest lifted with a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. She had always been able to rely on herself, and now, even more than before, she could. This secret fortune, the one that she had kept hidden all these years, was her lifeline. It was time to take control of her future. Later that afternoon, after ending her call with Bradley, Martha sat down in the living room, surrounded by papers, statements, and investment reports. It was strange to look at them now. These sheets of paper filled with numbers and assets, things she had kept buried beneath the surface of her quiet life. Stocks, real estate, bonds. All of it was carefully planned, tucked away for moments just like this. For years, she had avoided talking about money with her children, always fearing their judgment. They'd never understand. To David and Lily, money was a tool for control, a means to maintain their image. She didn't want to be a part of that. But now, as the weight of their rejection bore down on her, she realized she didn't need their approval. She could live without them. She would live without them. She would build her own life. She made a decision then, with an unexpected clarity. Her children had believed she was powerless. That mistake would be their undoing. Martha smiled to herself, a small, bitter curve of her lips. She wasn't going to fight to get back into their lives. No, she would let them stew in their guilt, let them believe they had won. But she would be living her life, on her terms, with no interference. She wasn't going to be the mother they wanted her to be. She was going to be the woman she had always been: strong, independent, and unapologetic. The first step was simple. She would start living the life she had always wanted. She would invest the money she had carefully stashed away into something that truly mattered to her. A new business, a new venture, something that wasn't about status or impressing anyone, but something that would give her purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Martha began to make plans. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer the woman sitting at her children's mercy. She was free, and in the distance, she could almost hear David and Lily, caught in their own web of regret, trying to claw their way back into her life. But Martha knew the truth. They would never be able to reach her again. Martha leaned back in the worn leather chair of her new office, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the desk. The room, small but bright, was tucked in the back of a renovated building in the heart of a bustling part of town. It was hers, something she had built on her own, with no one's approval, no one's expectations hanging over her. She had always dreamed of having her own business, of stepping out from behind the walls of her life as a teacher, as a mother. And now, she was finally living that dream. Her new nonprofit, Empowerment for All, was still in its infancy, but every day she could feel it growing. She had spent the last few weeks gathering resources, meeting with potential partners, and refining her mission statement. The goal was simple: to help women who were struggling to find financial independence, to help them build the skills and confidence they needed to live on their own terms. She had always been the one to give: her time, her love, her support. But now she was learning how to give in a different way. She was giving women the tools they needed to build their own futures, to take control of their financial destinies. And it felt better than anything she had done before. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the screen as she checked the message. It was from Bradley, her lawyer. "You're doing great, Martha. Just a reminder. Keep everything under wraps for now. No need to involve your kids. This is your moment. Don't let them take it from you." She smiled softly, tucking the phone back into her bag. Bradley was right. She had to keep her secret. They, David and Lily, couldn't know about the fortune she had built for herself. They hadn't earned that knowledge. Not yet, at least. They assumed she was floundering. They thought she was struggling to survive, just as they had believed all along. But Martha knew the truth. They were the ones who had miscalculated. They thought they could cast her aside, but they had underestimated the woman she had become. Martha shook off the thoughts of her children and turned her attention back to her work. She had a meeting to prepare for, and she wanted to be ready. As the hours passed, she felt the satisfaction of creating something new, something entirely hers. No one to answer to, no one to critique her decisions. She was building the life she had always deserved, and she was doing it on her own terms. The following week, after months of planning and saving, Martha boarded a plane for Europe. She had always dreamed of visiting the cities her students had written about in their essays, the places where history had been made. Now, as she sat on the flight, looking out over the endless expanse of the ocean below, she couldn't help but feel a rush of freedom. She wasn't doing this to escape, not exactly, but it was as though the weight of her old life had finally been lifted from her shoulders. She was free from David's demands, from Lily's disappointments. She was free from the role of mother that had been so tightly defined by her children. She was just Martha, a woman with a dream, and the power to make that dream come true. The cobblestone streets of Paris, the towering spires of Prague, the sun-kissed coastline of Italy, each place she visited felt like a step towards something new. She didn't need a reason to be there. She didn't need anyone's permission. She was living life on her terms, unburdened by anyone's expectations. Martha explored each city with a sense of wonder and purpose, soaking in the culture, the art, the stories of women who had lived before her. Women who had fought for their own independence, their own voices. She felt connected to them in a way she never had before, as if she were stepping into the legacy they had created, adding her own story to the tapestry of women who had come before her. But it wasn't just the beauty of Europe that filled her with excitement. It was the opportunities she was finding. At each stop, she met with potential donors for her nonprofit, forging connections that would help bring her vision to life. She secured a few important partnerships, each one a step closer to ensuring that empowerment for all would thrive. She had done it. She was making a difference, and no one could stop her now. She stayed in Europe for 3 weeks, savoring every moment of her solitude, every opportunity to redefine herself. It was a luxury she had never allowed herself before, the luxury of time and space to simply be. And when she finally boarded the flight back home, she wasn't the same woman who had left. She was stronger, more certain of who she was, and more confident in what she could accomplish. She had taken the first steps toward building a legacy that her children would never be a part of. She returned to the small office in the heart of the city, but everything felt different. Her vision for empowerment for all was clearer, more real than ever before. As the weeks passed, the nonprofit began to grow, slowly but surely. The more time Martha spent working on it, the more she realized that she wasn't just creating a business. She was creating a movement that would empower women to stand on their own, to take charge of their own futures, just as she had taken charge of hers. The satisfaction she felt in the quiet moments, the satisfaction of knowing she had built something from nothing, was beyond anything she could have imagined. She had done it for herself, and for the women who needed to hear her message. And the more she worked, the more fulfilled she became. Her children, of course, had no idea. They assumed she was still lost, still struggling. They didn't know how wrong they were, and they never would. It had been months since Martha had walked away from her old life. The phone calls stopped. The texts, the emails, everything had dried up as soon as she drove away from that house, leaving behind her children, their voices cold with rejection. David's angry words, Lily's icy indifference were still fresh in her memory, sharp as ever. But in the quiet solitude of her new life, Martha had found something she hadn't expected: peace. She had begun to let go of the need for their approval. Yet, now, as she sat at her small desk in her office, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Bradley checking in on her progress or a potential donor asking for a meeting. It was David. The number was unfamiliar, but she knew it without needing to look. Her heart gave a little jolt, but she let the phone ring a few more times before answering. "Mom." David's voice came through the line, sounding less like the arrogant man who had kicked her out and more like a son, lost and unsure. I... I've been thinking about everything, about how I treated you." He paused, taking a sharp breath. "I'm sorry." Martha leaned back in her chair, gripping the phone tightly. She had never expected this. But the bitterness she had felt months ago had softened, and now, the sting of it wasn't as sharp. Still, the silence between them felt thick, awkward, like there was too much distance between them now to bridge with a single apology. "I'm sorry," David repeated. "I shouldn't have kicked you out. You didn't deserve that. And I've been feeling guilty ever since. I've been an idiot, Mom. Can we try again? Can we reconnect?" Martha closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her again, that feeling of being invisible in her own home, of being undervalued and misunderstood. The same weight that had made her walk away in the first place. She didn't want to go back to that place, didn't want to live in their world of expectations and control. "I'm doing fine, David," she said softly, but there was no mistaking the finality in her tone. "I don't need your help." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel the disappointment and frustration radiating from him. "I can help you, Mom," David said, the offer more like a command. "You don't have to keep doing this on your own. I can help with the bills, with anything. You don't have to struggle." "Let me help." "No," Martha replied, her voice firm. "I don't need your pity, David. I never did. And I don't want it now. I've built my life, my future. I don't need to be taken care of by you or anyone else." There was another pause, but this one stretched out longer. Martha could feel his confusion, his inability to grasp her refusal. He had always believed he could control things, could fix everything with money, with his influence. But Martha wasn't one of his projects anymore. "You can't just..." he began, but Martha cut him off, her patience wearing thin. "I don't want you to help me. I never asked for your help before, and I don't need it now. You don't get to come back into my life like nothing happened. Your actions, your words, they hurt me, David. And you can't undo that?" The silence that followed felt louder than anything he could have said. David didn't speak again, and Martha wasn't sure if it was because he finally understood, or if he was simply at a loss for words. Either way, she wasn't waiting for him to fix things anymore. Then a soft, more familiar voice crackled through the phone. "Lily." Her tone was different, less demanding, but still laced with a hint of entitlement. "Mom, please," Lily said, her voice shaky. "I've been thinking about everything too. I shouldn't have told you to leave. I was upset, but I didn't mean it. Things can go back to how they were, can't they? If you just come back, we'll work through it. It'll all be normal again. We'll make it work. Okay. Martha stared out the window of her office, watching the bustling city below. She thought about the years she had spent chasing their approval, trying to meet their expectations, only to be discarded the moment she was no longer useful to them. The years of emotional neglect. They had never truly cared about her well-being, only their own comfort, their own convenience. Normal? Martha said, her voice cool, distant. You want things to go back to normal? That's just it, Lily. Normal is what led me to walk away in the first place. You never truly cared about me. You cared about what I could do for you. And I'm done with that. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The decision had been made long ago, but hearing their apologies, their desperate offers of help, only solidified it. She had moved on. They hadn't earned a place in her life anymore. I'm not coming back, Lily, she said, her voice unwavering. I've moved on. I'm building something for myself, and I'm doing just fine without you. Lily's voice faltered, but Martha didn't wait for her to respond. She hung up, her finger pressing the button with quiet finality. For a moment, Martha sat in the silence of her office, letting the weight of the conversation settle over her. The sting of their rejection had dulled with time, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing she was no longer their caretaker, no longer their pawn. She was free. And no apology, no offer of help could change that. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city that was slowly becoming her new home. Her children, still entangled in their own guilt and pride, would never reach her now. And for the first time in her life, Martha felt the quiet joy of having built something that was hers, only hers. The auditorium was packed. The air hummed with anticipation as Martha stood backstage, watching the crowd through the heavy velvet curtains. A sea of faces, each one eager to hear her story. She had always been a quiet observer, a listener rather than a speaker. But tonight, everything would change. She adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The light from the stage washed over her, casting long shadows on the floor, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid. She had come so far from the woman who had packed her bags in silence, from the woman who had driven away from the house she had built for her children. Now she was a woman who had rebuilt her life, piece by piece, on her own terms. Her name was called, and the applause that followed felt like a wave crashing over her. She walked confidently to the podium, the sound of her heels clicking against the wooden stage, the only noise cutting through the silence. The audience quieted as she reached the microphone, and Martha stood there for a moment, her fingers gripping the edges of the podium. Her heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with purpose, with power. She looked out at the crowd, meeting their eyes, taking in their faces, some familiar, most not. They were here to hear her story, her truth. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, Martha began, her voice steady but warm. When I was invited to speak at this event, I thought about it long and hard. It wasn't easy to say yes. For years, I've kept my story to myself, tucked away, because I was afraid of how people would see me. She paused for a moment, the weight of those words hanging in the air. She could feel the shift in the room. Everyone was listening, hanging on to her every word. But I've learned something over the last year, she continued, her voice growing stronger, more resolute. I've learned that sharing our stories is how we heal. It's how we help others heal. And so, I'm going to share mine with you tonight. She took a deep breath, the memories of her past still fresh but now no longer painful. She had done the work, healing, rebuilding. It was time to speak her truth. You see, Martha said, her gaze sweeping over the room. A year ago, I was kicked out of my own home. Not by a stranger, but by my own children. They thought I had nothing left. They thought I was weak because I had lost my job. They thought I was a burden. But what they didn't know, what none of us knew, is that I had been preparing for this moment my whole life. The audience shifted, some leaning forward, others exchanging looks. Martha could feel the energy in the room change, the collective gasp at her words. This was a story they hadn't expected. They thought I had nothing, she continued, her voice unwavering. But I had something far more valuable than they realized. I had independence. I had a fortune I had built quietly over the years. Investments, savings, real estate. I had everything I needed to rebuild my life from scratch. She could see the shock on their faces, hear the murmurs of disbelief. They were not just listening to a woman who had overcome hardship. They were hearing the story of a woman who had taken back control of her life. Martha's eyes scanned the crowd, and for the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the mother who had been discarded. She was a woman with her own purpose, her own mission. The day they kicked me out of my house, Martha went on, her voice softening, was the day I realized I didn't need them anymore. It was the day I realized that I was enough. I didn't need their approval, their validation, or their help. I could do this on my own. I would do this on my own. The room was silent now, every eye locked on her. She could see the faces of women in the audience. Some were nodding, some were wiping tears from their eyes. They saw themselves in her. They felt her pain, her triumph. I started a nonprofit, she said, her voice gaining strength. Empowerment for all. I used the resources I had quietly saved over the years to create a space for women like me, women who have been overlooked, underestimated, women who have been told they're not enough. We provide financial literacy, resources for business ownership, and mentorship. We give women the tools they need to take control of their own futures. Martha's heart swelled with pride. She was living her dream, her vision, her truth. And the world was beginning to take notice. The applause started slowly at first, tentative, unsure. But then it built, louder, stronger, until it filled the room like a tidal wave. Martha's hands shook as she raised them, a humble gesture of gratitude. As she stepped down from the stage, she could hear her name being whispered among the crowd. She knew what they were saying. They were talking about her story, about her strength, and about the woman she had become. Backstage, she pulled out her phone, her hands still trembling from the rush of emotions. There were dozens of notifications, messages from friends, supporters, even strangers. One of them caught her eye. A message from Bradley. "You did it, Martha. You've become the face of independence. Your story will inspire millions. You've just changed everything." Her heart swelled. The message was true. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the women who had been silenced, ignored, told they couldn't. It was about the movement she had started, a movement that was now unstoppable. Martha looked out at the crowd one last time. In the distance, she saw David and Lily, standing at the back of the room, watching her with wide eyes. Their faces were unreadable, but she could feel the weight of their regret, their realization that they had underestimated her. And in that moment, Martha knew one thing for certain. They could never take this away from her. She had built something that was hers, only hers, and nothing could ever change that. David sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring blankly at his phone. The bright screen reflected in his eyes, showing the flood of messages that had poured in since Martha's speech. There were the usual congratulatory texts from friends and colleagues, people who had always been supportive of his image. But now, there was something else. Something he hadn't expected. The public had changed. Everyone was talking about her. Martha. She had done the impossible, recovered from the rejection of her own children, built a successful nonprofit, and become an advocate for women's independence, and they were all praising her for it. David's finger hovered over his phone as he read another message, this one from a mutual friend in the business world. "I'm sorry to hear about the situation with your mom. Honestly, I'm losing respect for both of you. It's hard to keep supporting people who treat family like that." His jaw clenched. The shame hit him hard, like a physical blow. He had always been the one to hold the reins, to control everything. He thought he could just smooth things over, offer Martha money, offer her something. But it had all backfired. Now his reputation was slipping, his business partners losing trust in him, and his friends beginning to turn their backs. The phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lily, sent late last night. "David, I can't do this anymore. People are starting to pull away. No one will do business with us now. It's like we've become toxic. We have to fix this. We have to make it right with Mom." David slammed his glass down on the desk, the amber liquid splashing over the sides. The weight of his guilt bore down on him, suffocating him in his own space. But it wasn't just guilt. It was the realization that Martha had gotten better without them. She had thrived. And they had sunk. Lily's voice echoed in his mind, angry and pleading from their last conversation. "She's just letting this go. She's leaving us in the dust, David. We need to fix this." But nothing they did, no amount of money or apologies seemed to break through. Every effort they made was met with cold indifference. David's mind raced. He thought of reaching out to Martha again, offering her more. Anything to restore the balance. But what could he offer now? He picked up his phone and typed out a message, fingers shaking. "Martha, I know we've been terrible. I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. Please, let's talk. We can make it right. You were always there for us. I want to make it right." He stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting the message. He knew she wouldn't respond. Not after everything that had happened. He had underestimated her. And now it felt like the universe was showing him how deeply he had misjudged her. Meanwhile, Lily sat in her apartment, her fingers hovering over her phone screen. She had spent hours drafting the perfect post, knowing full well that it could either redeem them or bury them deeper. She had to get it right. Finally, she hit send. "To everyone who's been following this story, I want to apologize. I know many of you are angry, confused. What we did to our mom was unforgivable. I take full responsibility for it. I'm so sorry, Mom. Please forgive me." She stared at the words, the finality of them sinking in. She hadn't just posted it for the world to see. She had posted it hoping that Martha would see it. That somehow, this admission of guilt would lead to reconciliation. But deep down, she knew it was too late. As the hours passed, the post received a flurry of likes, comments, and shares. But no reply from Martha. Just a sinking realization that the damage had been done, and there was nothing they could do to fix it. Meanwhile, Martha's life was moving forward at a pace she had never imagined. The invitations for speaking engagements started flooding in, each one more prestigious than the last. She was becoming a symbol of empowerment, a beacon for women everywhere who had ever been told they weren't enough. Jenna, Martha's neighbor, had been her rock through all of this, and now she was standing by her, watching the transformation unfold. One evening, after Martha had just wrapped up a call with a major news outlet that wanted to feature her story, Jenna walked in with a cup of coffee in hand, her face alight with excitement. "Look at you, Martha," Jenna said, setting the cup on the table. "You're becoming a household name." Martha shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know about that, but it feels incredible. It's not about fame. It's about finally doing something that means something. Something real." Jenna sat down beside her, her voice gentle. "You've worked hard for this. You deserve it. Just don't forget that you're doing it for you, not for anyone else." Martha nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the woman who had been there when she had nowhere else to turn. "I know. And that's the biggest difference now. I'm not living for anyone else. I'm living for myself." But even as Martha embraced her newfound success, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that kept creeping into her mind. David and Lily, her children, were still out there, struggling with their guilt, their apologies, their pleas, their regret. It all felt distant, like they were trying to reclaim something that had never truly been theirs to begin with. Martha was done waiting for them to catch up. She had moved on. She was free. As the night wore on, Martha looked at her phone one last time, her heart heavy as a new notification appeared. It was from Lily. "I just want you to know. I'm sorry, Mom. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me one day." Martha sat in silence for a moment, staring at the screen, her fingers hovering over the message. She could feel the weight of everything, the years of emotional neglect, the betrayal, the pain. But she didn't reply. Instead, she closed the phone, set it down on the table, and walked to the window. Below her, the city sprawled out in a sea of lights, shimmering, vibrant, full of possibility. And Martha knew, without a shadow of doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. David stood in the corner of his office, his fingers gripping the back of his leather chair, his gaze fixed on the empty desk in front of him. The walls, once filled with certificates and accolades, now seemed oppressive, their emptiness a reflection of the situation he found himself in. The calls had stopped. The investments had pulled out. The high-end clients who once flocked to his firm now avoided his calls. His business was crumbling. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. A month ago, everything had been so different. He had been riding high, confident that his connections, his power, and his wealth could shield him from any storm. But the storm had come, and it had swept everything away. One of the last clients he had worked with, a major tech firm, had pulled its funding. He had received a terse email from his partner earlier that morning. A polite but firm message. "Due to recent developments, we can no longer proceed with our agreement." David had wanted to scream, to lash out, but the reality was clear. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. No one wanted to be linked to the son of the woman who had been rejected and thrown out by her own children. David sank into his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't thought it would come to this. His reputation, once a prized possession, was now a liability. The people who had once sought his advice now turned their backs in disgust. Across town, Lily sat in her spacious apartment, the once familiar hum of her high-powered career now replaced with an unnerving silence. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the coffee table, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up. The text messages, the missed calls, it was all too much. She had lost a major advertising contract just last week, and her professional network, once thriving, had begun to fray at the edges. Lily had prided herself on her image, on the carefully constructed persona she had built over the years. But now, that image was in tatters. The media had picked up the story about Martha's speech, and suddenly, Lily was the villain, the daughter who had cast aside her mother in her time of need. The phone buzzed again, and Lily finally picked it up, her eyes scanning the screen. A message from one of her former colleagues read, "We're pulling out of the project. It's just bad timing with everything going on." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her failures crashing down on her. The life she had built, the luxurious apartment, the high-end designer clothes, the dinners at exclusive restaurants, was all slipping away. Her friends, her business associates, her social circle were shrinking, one by one. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface now threatened to consume her. David and Lily were both losing everything they had worked for, and they both knew the cause. Their own selfishness, their pride, their actions, their mistreatment of Martha had ignited a chain reaction they couldn't control. Meanwhile, Martha's life was flourishing in ways they had never imagined. Her nonprofit, Empowerment for All, had grown exponentially, drawing attention from across the country. The calls from donors and supporters flooded in, and with each passing day, her vision for helping women achieve financial independence was becoming a reality. Bradley, her trusted lawyer, was instrumental in securing large donations for her cause. As a result, Martha's influence as a philanthropist grew, and her name became synonymous with strength and empowerment. She no longer needed to explain her worth. Her actions spoke for themselves. One evening, as Martha stood before a room of donors at a gala, she could feel the weight of everything she had built, everything she had overcome, reflected in their eyes. These were women who had been through their own struggles, and now, thanks to Martha's initiative, they had the tools to change their own futures. After the event, as the guests mingled and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air, Bradley approached her with a broad smile. "Martha, I've just confirmed several more major donations," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "You're not just changing lives, you're changing the game." Martha raised her glass, a smile tugging at her lips. "I couldn't have done it without people like you." She took a sip, feeling a rush of gratitude. She had worked so hard for this, and now she could finally see the fruits of her labor. As the evening progressed, Martha's phone buzzed. It was a message from the prestigious Women's Empowerment Awards Committee. "Congratulations! We are proud to inform you that you will be receiving this year's Leadership Award for your work with Empowerment for All." Martha's breath caught in her throat as she read the message again. This was the recognition she had worked so hard for. It wasn't about the fame, though. This was about her mission, her belief in helping women find independence, in giving them the opportunity to build a life of their own, just as she had. Later that night, as she stood on the stage to accept her award, the crowd's applause thundered in her ears. The lights were blinding, the stage grand, but it was the faces in the audience that held her attention. She saw women of all ages, women from different walks of life, all gathered to celebrate the same cause. In her speech, she thanked them all for their support, but as she scanned the room, she didn't see David or Lily. They weren't there to witness her triumph, and for the first time, that didn't bother her. She had done this on her own. She didn't need them. The next day, as the media coverage of her award and speech flooded social media, the world took notice. Martha's name was everywhere. Empowerment for All was becoming a national movement, and with it, Martha's influence was spreading far beyond anything she could have imagined. And as David and Lily sat in their office, watching the news reports from the sidelines, they realized something. They had lost her. Not just as a mother, but as a person they could control, a woman who had once been their pawn. Martha had reclaimed her life, and in doing so, she had made herself untouchable. And that, David and Lily both knew, was something they would never get back. Martha sat in her hotel room, the skyline of the city stretching out before her, but it was the view inside her own heart that took precedence today. She was about to take the stage at a global conference on women's financial independence, a keynote speaker. Her. The woman who had once been cast aside, dismissed as weak and dependent. Now, she was the voice of empowerment, the woman whose story was changing the lives of so many others. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen and saw the name that still haunted her thoughts. David. She hesitated before swiping the message open. "Martha, we've been following your journey, and we're proud of you. We know things haven't been easy, but if you're open to it, we'd love to help sponsor your upcoming speaking engagement. It would mean a lot to us. and we could show the world that we're all in this together. She blinked at the words, the audacity of them taking her breath away. The offer was wrapped in layers of what seemed like genuine concern, but Martha knew better. They didn't want to support her. They wanted to take back control, to re-enter her life under the guise of redemption. They had no real understanding of her, and certainly no idea how far beyond their reach she had gone. Martha sighed, her finger hovering over the screen. She could feel the weight of everything she had achieved, the years of quiet sacrifice, the moments of self-doubt, the countless hours spent building something for herself. A simple text back would be easy. It could mend the brokenness, at least temporarily. But that's all it would be. Temporary. She wasn't interested in a temporary fix anymore. Not with them. Not with their offers of help that were always tied to their own expectations. She set her phone down, taking a deep breath. It was time to step fully into the light that she had created for herself. The conference hall was enormous, buzzing with anticipation as women from all over the world filled the seats. Global leaders, activists, entrepreneurs, and influencers. Martha's story had reached them all. She was now more than a survivor. She was a symbol. The stage glittered under the lights, and as Martha stood behind the curtain, her heart raced. But it wasn't with fear. It was with excitement, with a profound sense of purpose. She had never imagined that she would be here, speaking to a crowd of thousands, and yet, she had earned it. Next up, we have someone whose journey has truly inspired us all. The host's voice rang out over the loudspeakers, a smile spreading across Martha's face as she stepped into the spotlight. Please welcome Martha Brown, founder of Empowerment for All. The crowd erupted into applause, a roar of support that nearly knocked the breath out of her. It was a standing ovation. And it wasn't for the woman who had been thrown out of her home. It wasn't for the woman who had been kicked aside. It was for the woman who had built her own empire, her own legacy, and had transformed the lives of so many others. As Martha took the stage, she felt her nerves settle, her voice steady as she gripped the microphone. She could see the faces in the crowd, their eyes filled with admiration, their attention unwavering. It's hard to believe, standing here, that just a year ago I was struggling to find my place in the world, she began, her words flowing easily now, the story of her journey, of her transformation, spilling out with an energy that had become second nature. I was told I wasn't enough, that I was too old, too out of touch, too dependent on others, but I learned something along the way. I learned that the only limits that matter are the ones you place on yourself. Her voice carried through the auditorium, weaving through the crowd. Women nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes, others leaning forward, hanging on every word. Martha spoke of her struggles, the pain of rejection, and the power of reclaiming her life. As women, we're told to fit into boxes. We're told to be what others expect of us. But I'm here to tell you that you have the power to shatter those boxes. You have the power to build something that's yours, something that no one can ever take from you. The crowd was silent, absorbing every word, and then the applause started, slow at first, then building, a crescendo of approval that sent a wave of warmth through Martha's chest. As she finished her speech, the audience erupted into a standing ovation, the cheers deafening. And then the cameras flashed, capturing the moment, capturing Martha, a woman who had dared to change her destiny. Backstage, she couldn't stop smiling. Her phone buzzed with notifications, a flood of new messages, interviews lined up, offers from international organizations wanting to collaborate with her. Her journey was no longer just hers. It had become a global movement, and the world was noticing. But as the excitement of the moment settled, a new message flashed on her screen. It was from David. Martha, we've been following your success, and we're proud of you. I know things have been hard, but please, we want to be part of your journey. We can help you. We can sponsor your events, help you reach even greater heights. Let us be part of your success." Martha stared at the message, her fingers trembling slightly. She had come so far. She had built everything on her own, piece by piece, without their help, without their expectations. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her phone off, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. This was her moment, and no one could take it from her. Not David, not Lily, not anyone. The world was watching now, and Martha, for the first time in her life, knew that she had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. David and Lily sat in the plush chairs of a cafe, their faces clouded with regret. The bright afternoon sun filtered through the windows, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill in their hearts. For months, they had watched from the sidelines as Martha's success grew, bigger, stronger, more powerful. And now they realized what they had lost. Martha wasn't just their mother anymore. She was a global figure, a symbol of resilience and independence. And no amount of apologies or pleas could bring her back to the place they once occupied in her life. David stared down at his untouched coffee, his fingers drumming on the mug. His thoughts were clouded, torn between his pride and the undeniable truth that he had blown it. He had thought the money, the influence, the power would be enough to smooth over their mistakes. But now, the walls of their past had crumbled, leaving nothing but emptiness between them. "I don't think she'll ever forgive us," Lily said, her voice flat, but the pain behind her words was unmistakable. She hadn't let go of her belief that they could somehow fix things, but the recent events had made it clearer than ever. Martha was gone, and the woman who had once bent over backward for her children had moved on, leaving David and Lily in the dust. David's eyes flicked toward her, his face hardening. "I should have seen it. I should have known that it would take more than just a few words to undo everything we did to her. But we didn't even try, Lily. We didn't care about her. Not like we should have." Lily's gaze drifted out the window, her fingers brushing absent-mindedly over her phone. She had posted apologies, shared her guilt, but Martha hadn't responded to any of it. The realization had sunk in. Martha had left them behind, not because she was bitter or angry, but because she had learned to value herself more than she had ever valued them. They weren't a part of her life anymore, not the way they used to be. The very thought of trying to rekindle their relationship felt hollow, futile. How could they explain their actions? How could they justify all the years of neglect? All the times they dismissed her needs in favor of their own? The sound of Martha's name echoed in the cafe as a news story about her nonprofit flashed across the television screen behind them. Martha Brown, philanthropist and founder of Empowerment for All, continues to inspire women worldwide by helping them achieve financial independence. The word stung, but it was the image that followed, the smiling, confident woman on the screen, that really struck a nerve. David and Lily were left with nothing but their mistakes and their pride. Martha, on the other hand, was building something greater than they could ever have imagined. Martha stood at the podium of another empowerment event, her voice steady, her heart full. The crowd in front of her, an audience of hundreds of women, was silent, their rapt attention focused on her every word. "There was a time," Martha began, "when I let other people's opinions dictate my worth. I let others define who I was, what I was capable of. I let them tell me that my age, my circumstances, my struggles made me less than enough. But what I've learned is this: you are enough. Right now, as you stand, as you are. You have the power to change your life, to change your future." The crowd erupted in applause, but Martha's focus was on the faces in the front row. They were women from all walks of life, some struggling, some thriving, all united in the common purpose of empowering themselves and each other. It was for them that she spoke, not for David, not for Lily, and certainly not for anyone who had ever made her feel small. She shared her story of losing everything, of being cast aside, of rebuilding from nothing. And with each word, she felt herself grow stronger. She wasn't just telling her story, she was giving them the tools to tell their own. As she finished her speech, she felt the energy in the room lift, felt the collective power of hundreds of women who had been inspired by her journey. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. She had found her purpose, her legacy, and now she was living it fully. Backstage, Bradley approached her, his smile wide. "Martha, you just nailed it. You're everywhere now. You're a household name, and we're just getting started." Martha laughed softly, the joy in her eyes lighting up the room. "I couldn't have done it without people like you." She gave him a grateful look, but it wasn't just about him. It was about the work, the movement that was bigger than any one person, bigger than any apology or regret. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from David, another desperate plea to sponsor her next speaking event. She had seen the message 1,000 times before, but this time, it felt different. Her finger hovered over the screen as she read the words. "Martha, we've been following your success and we're proud of you. Let us help. We can sponsor your next event. Let us show the world that we're supporting you." The same old offer, wrapped in new promises, but she didn't need their help anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not in any way. Martha looked around the backstage area at the people who had supported her, the women whose lives she was changing. This was her team now. She was no longer bound to David and Lily's expectations, their control. She put her phone down without replying. Martha had already moved beyond the world they had tried to trap her in. She had built something for herself, a legacy that would outlive their regret. And as she stepped off the stage, ready for the next opportunity to inspire, the finality of it hit her. They had lost her. And this time, it wasn't just their mother they had lost. It was the woman who had become untouchable. Martha smiled to herself as the crowd's cheers faded behind her. She had done it, and nothing would ever take this freedom from her again. Martha stood in the center of the bustling office, the hum of activity around her, a comforting reminder of how far she had come. The walls of empowerment for all were now adorned with photos of women from all walks of life, each one reflecting the impact of her work. Donations, partnerships, and collaborations with international organizations had turned her nonprofit into a movement, reaching millions of women across the globe. Her inbox was flooded with new inquiries from potential donors, collaborators, and media outlets eager to feature her success. Martha's name had become synonymous with strength, independence, and resilience, everything she had fought for when she had been told she wasn't enough. As she read through one of the latest emails, a wide smile spread across her face. The subject line read, "International Women's Forum, Invitation to Speak." It was another prestigious offer, another opportunity to share her journey with the world. She had gone from being someone others overlooked to being someone they couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and for a moment, the smile faded. It was from Bradley, her lawyer. "I've just heard back from the foundation. They're prepared to make a major donation to your nonprofit. They want to partner with you for the long term. This is huge." Martha read the message again, her heart swelling. The work she had built from the ground up, the late nights, the self-doubt, the battles with herself, all of it had led to this, a legacy that no one could take from her. But in the back of her mind, the same question lingered. What about David and Lily? She hadn't heard from them in weeks, not since she had turned down their sponsorship offers. She hadn't expected an apology or a change of heart. After all, their actions had already sealed their fate in her life. Yet, despite all the growth and success she had achieved, there remained a hollow spot in her chest that their absence seemed to fill. David and Lily, on the other hand, were spiraling. The weight of their actions, once a distant ache, was now a constant pressure. David had tried to salvage what was left of his business, but clients continued to pull out, and his once thriving network of investors now looked at him with disdain. His firm had once been a symbol of prestige. Now it was a sinking ship. The shame of it all gnawed at him, pulling him into a deep abyss of regret. Lily had tried to reinvent herself, but the damage to her reputation was too much. The contracts she once attracted so effortlessly were now out of reach, and the professional circles she had once dominated turned their backs, unwilling to associate with someone who had been so publicly condemned for their treatment of their own mother. It wasn't just their businesses that were failing, it was their entire lives. They were the pariahs of their once elite circles, and there was no way back. In a last-ditch effort, they had decided to start a new business together. A fresh start, they told themselves. But as they sat in the cramped, empty office of their new venture, the reality set in. Without the credibility, without Martha's steady hand in their lives, they were just two people trying to climb a mountain that was too steep, too slick with their failures to hold any traction. Their first pitch to investors had been a disaster. The idea, though solid, lacked the trust they had once relied upon. When the investors politely declined, citing concerns over their public image, the weight of their lost connection with Martha hit them harder than any rejection. They had no foundation to stand on anymore. Not personally, not professionally. Meanwhile, Martha's success was only gaining momentum. She had recently established the Martha Brown Scholarship Fund, dedicated to providing financial aid to women seeking education and careers in business. The scholarship program was an instant success, drawing in donations from around the world. Women who had once felt unseen now had the chance to pursue their dreams, and Martha had made it possible. The media had taken notice. Her story was everywhere, from magazines to news shows, from podcasts to feature articles. She had become an icon of self-made success, a figurehead for a movement that was changing the way women saw themselves. And, as the requests for interviews piled up, Martha knew that her work was just beginning. She was offered a book deal, a chance to tell her story in full, to inspire even more people with her journey. It wasn't the fame she craved, but the opportunity to share her message with a broader audience. To remind every woman that they had the power to break free from whatever shackles society had placed on them. The book would be a declaration, a testament to how far she had come and to the lessons she had learned along the way. And yet, as Martha stood on the balcony of her penthouse suite that evening, overlooking the city she had once dreamed of conquering, she felt the familiar twinge of sorrow. She had come so far, and yet David and Lily still lingered in her thoughts. They were no longer just her children. They were a reminder of the past, of the family that had once been whole. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized they weren't the ones who had built this life. She had. Alone. With every milestone she reached, Martha found herself farther removed from the people she had once called family. It wasn't that she hadn't tried to reach them, but her efforts had been rejected, time and time again. They had never understood her, not in the way she needed. And she had stopped trying to explain herself. Her success was hers to own. Her choices were her own, and her freedom, her true freedom, was something that could never be taken from her again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden glow, Martha reflected on the path she had taken. She was proud of what she had built, proud of the women she was empowering, proud of the legacy she was creating. And as the world watched, she knew one thing for certain: they were no longer a part of her story. and that was something they would never be able to touch. Martha stood in the center of the bookstore, her book-shattered boxes displayed on a prominent shelf, its cover a bold reflection of the woman she had become. The launch event was packed, with people from all walks of life eager to hear her story. Her journey, once marked by rejection and fear, had become a testament to resilience. She had taken control of her destiny, and now the world was listening. The book had become an instant success, a beacon for women who had felt silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. Her message of independence, empowerment, and the ability to break free from toxic relationships had resonated with millions. The sales were through the roof, and every interview, every radio spot, only solidified her status as an icon. But the accolades, the media coverage, and the fame were not what filled her with the deepest satisfaction. It was the work she was doing, her nonprofit, her scholarship fund, the millions of dollars she had given away to help other women find their footing. That was where her heart truly lay. Meanwhile, David and Lily were still struggling, and their desperation had only deepened in the wake of Martha's success. They had tried everything, reaching out, apologizing, and even pleading for a second chance. But no matter how much they begged, Martha remained resolute. Their messages were ignored. Their offers of help were met with silence. David had tried to rebuild his business, but it was clear he no longer had the trust or the connections that had once propelled him to the top. Clients pulled out, citing his tarnished reputation, and investors stopped returning his calls. The dream of reclaiming his former life seemed more distant with every passing day. Lily, too, had seen her career spiral. The offers that had once flowed easily were now scarce. Her name, once synonymous with success, had become a liability. Business associates who had once admired her now turned away, unwilling to associate with someone who had been publicly shunned for mistreating their own mother. David and Lily tried to keep their pride intact, but deep down, they knew they were on the brink of losing everything. Their attempts to make amends were now seen as opportunistic by the public, a desperate grab at redemption that felt hollow, insincere. In the midst of all this, Martha's nonprofit continued to flourish. She had established a legacy that was bigger than anything David and Lily could ever have imagined. She had created something that would outlive them both. Empowerment for all had become a global movement, and it was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. One evening, after another successful speaking engagement, Bradley approached Martha with a proposition. "Martha," he said, his voice calm but serious, "the time has come to consider your future in full. We should be thinking about your estate planning, how you want to leave a lasting impact." Martha smiled softly, the weight of her decisions clear in her mind. She had already given millions to causes she believed in, but now it was time to make things official. "I've been thinking about that," Martha replied. "It's time to cut ties for good." Bradley raised an eyebrow, understanding her meaning immediately. "You're sure?" Martha nodded, her expression firm. "David and Lily have had their chance. I've already given them enough of myself. And now it's time for me to make sure my wealth goes to the people who truly deserve it." The decision was not one she took lightly, but it felt necessary. With a few legal documents signed and finalized, Martha made her intentions clear. Her fortune, the wealth she had built through hard work, sacrifice, and independence, would no longer go to her children. Instead, it would be directed to the causes she cared about most: education, women's independence, and empowerment. Martha sat in her office, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside the window, her thoughts moving in a quiet but deliberate current. She had once sacrificed so much for her children. She had tried to make them understand the importance of independence, but they had never truly seen her for who she was. They had only seen her as a tool, something to control, to manage, and that had always hurt her more than they would ever know. But she had moved past that. She had grown stronger, not just in her career, but in herself. And now, the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. She was no longer tied to them. They had lost their chance. The media had caught wind of the decision to redirect her fortune to charity, and the public response was overwhelming. While many applauded her generosity, others questioned her decision, wondering if her children's mistakes could be forgiven. But for Martha, the answer was clear. "I've given them everything I could," she told a reporter during an interview. "But I've learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone is to let them go. I'm doing this for the women who will build their own futures, for the women who need the resources I can provide. I've built something that's truly mine. I've built a legacy that will last." Her words were met with applause, and Martha knew in her heart that she had made the right choice. Months later, Martha reflected on the woman she had become. She stood in front of a full auditorium, speaking to an audience of women who had been touched by her work. Her voice was steady, her heart full. She no longer cared about being loved or accepted by those who had failed her. She had found something far more valuable, her own happiness. David and Lily were nowhere to be seen, and that was exactly how it should be. Martha had done what so many never dared to. She had chosen herself. And in doing so, she had built something that no one, least of all her children, could ever take from her. As the crowd cheered, Martha smiled to herself, knowing that her legacy was safe. The future was hers to shape, and it was one she would never let go of again. The lights dimmed, casting a golden glow over the vast auditorium. Martha sat quietly at her table, a soft murmur of conversation around her. She was dressed simply, elegantly, no flashy designer labels, no artificial adornments. Just the woman she had become, the woman who had chosen herself, who had decided to step out of the shadows and into the light of her own making. Tonight was another milestone, another recognition of a life rebuilt, of a journey that had taken her from rejection to redemption, from being invisible to becoming a symbol. The humanitarian award ceremony was about to begin, and Martha had been chosen to receive the highest honor of the night. It was no longer about the accolades, the awards, or the spotlight. It was about the journey, the choices she had made, the lives she had touched. And tonight, she would embrace every moment of it. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces of the women who filled the seats, so many of them inspired by her story, drawn to her message of independence. They were the reason she had continued to fight, the reason she had kept pushing forward when all seemed lost. They were the women who had built their own paths, who had refused to let society's expectations define their worth. And then, her eyes landed on them, David and Lily. Their faces were barely visible in the crowd, but she knew they were there. They had come, as they always did when they wanted something, but this time they were no longer the focus of her attention. Martha had long since accepted that her relationship with them was gone. They had rejected her when she needed them most, and no amount of regret, no apology could change that. Yet, tonight, they were there, watching, waiting. A symbol of the past that she had left behind. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, but Martha's mind was elsewhere, her heart still in calm. She had come so far. And as she sat in her seat, looking out at the room, she realized how much stronger she had become. She no longer needed their approval, their love. She had found something far deeper than any familial bond, her own sense of self-worth. Her name echoed through the auditorium as the presenter took the stage, and the audience rose to their feet in applause. It was a roar of admiration that seemed to pulse through her chest, but it wasn't just the crowd's recognition that mattered. It was the quiet strength she felt within herself, the knowledge that she had made it on her own. Martha walked to the stage, her head held high, and she accepted the award with a grace that had taken years to cultivate. She stood before the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the audience, and a deep sense of peace settled over her. This wasn't just about winning an award. This was about the journey. "I don't know where to begin," she started, her voice steady and full of conviction. "There was a time when I felt completely invisible, when I allowed others, my family, society, expectations, to define who I was. I let those voices tell me I wasn't enough, that I had no place in this world. But what I've learned is that the only place I need to be is right here, right now. And the only approval I need is my own." The audience leaned in, rapt with attention. They had heard her story before, but tonight, there was something different in her voice. Something unshakable, a quiet power that came from having built a life that was truly hers. "I spent years trying to live up to someone else's idea of who I should be," Martha continued, her gaze briefly flicking toward the back of the room where her children sat, eyes downcast. "But today, I stand before you as a woman who has chosen to live for herself, who has chosen to build something that cannot be taken away, not by rejection, not by failure, and certainly not by anyone's expectations." Her words struck a chord, and the applause that followed was deafening. Martha paused, letting the moment wash over her. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for all the women who had ever felt small, who had ever been told they weren't enough. "You are enough," she said, her voice ringing out across the room. "And you always have been?" The crowd erupted into a standing ovation, but it was the look on the faces of the women in the audience, tears of gratitude, of empowerment, that filled her with the deepest sense of fulfillment. She had done this. She had turned her pain into purpose. As she stepped down from the stage, a sense of finality washed over her. She was at peace. She had built something bigger than herself, a legacy that would live on long after tonight, long after the applause faded. Backstage, Bradley greeted her with a warm smile. "You did it, Martha. They won't forget this night." Martha smiled back, her eyes bright. "I'm not doing this for them," she said softly, her gaze shifting to the horizon outside the window. "I'm doing it for the women who need to hear that they're worthy. For the ones who need to see that you can build a life that is entirely your own. I've built something that no one can take from me. Not them, not anyone." She looked down at the award in her hands, but it wasn't the physical object that mattered. It was the weight of what it represented. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had created something that was far greater than wealth, far greater than fame. She had built a legacy of freedom. As the night unfolded, Martha reflected on the long road she had walked, the years of heartache, of struggle, of believing in a future that seemed impossible. She had chosen her own path, and in doing so, she had found a sense of peace that she never thought was possible. She had walked away from the people who tried to control her, from the ones who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. And in doing so, she had built a life that would last, for generations, for women everywhere. As she walked off the stage, head held high, Martha knew she had achieved something that was truly hers, a legacy of independence, of self-worth, and of living life on her own terms. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The letters came on a quiet afternoon, nestled between piles of fan mail and partnership proposals. Martha set the envelope down on her desk, her fingers tracing the address. It was from David and Lily. A part of her, deep down, knew it was only a matter of time before they would try to reach out. But she hadn't expected it to feel like this. A flood of regret in black ink, an attempt to repair what had been broken long before they realized it was too late. She opened the first one, her hands still steady despite the emotions that rose like a tide inside her. "Mom," the letter began, "I don't expect you to forgive us. I don't expect anything at all, but I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. We were selfish. and I know now that we've lost you. I can't undo what I did, but I hope you can understand how deeply I regret pushing you away. We should have been there for you. We should have understood. Martha folded the letter back up slowly. She didn't need to read the rest. She could feel the weight of their words, but they didn't carry the meaning she needed. They had hurt her deeply, and even now, their regret seemed hollow, as though it was only a response to their own failure rather than a genuine understanding of the pain they had caused her. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lily. Martha, I've been thinking about everything. I know it's too late, but please, I'm sorry. You were always there for us and we took you for granted. I don't know what I was thinking. I wish I could make it right, but I know I can't. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Martha stared at the screen. The words, just like the letter, carried with them a deep ache. She felt the years of bitterness, the rejection, the pain of their abandonment flood back. But with it, there was something else now, a quiet resolve. Her heart wasn't the same anymore. She had built something that was hers, something she couldn't let anyone tear down, not even her children. The apology, as heartfelt as it seemed, wasn't enough to undo the years of emotional neglect. It wasn't enough to rewrite the choices they had made to let her go when she needed them most. She didn't respond. Instead, she focused on what she had created. Her nonprofit was thriving, her voice now one of influence in the world, and her legacy was becoming more than just a dream. She was offering mentorship programs for women who had faced struggles similar to her own, women who had been pushed aside, told they were less than, that their worth was dependent on the approval of others. She had created a space for them to heal, to rebuild, and to reclaim their own destinies. David sat alone in his office, the weight of his own decisions crashing down around him. His business was in freefall, his reputation irreparably damaged. He had tried everything, but nothing could undo the public perception that he was a failure. He had always been able to fix things, always been able to manipulate his way out of trouble. But this time, nothing worked. Not his money, not his status, not even his apologies to Martha. The more he tried, the more the world pulled away from him. Lily wasn't faring much better. The contracts she once held in her hands like trophies had slipped away, leaving her with nothing but empty promises and crumbling relationships. Her once glowing career was now a shadow, and the people who had once admired her no longer returned her calls. She had tried to reach out to Martha, but there had been no response. The truth was clear now. They had lost her, not just as a mother, but as a woman who had once been part of their world, and nothing could bring her back. David looked at his phone again. That same message to Martha still sitting there unsent. He couldn't bring himself to hit send. How could he? He knew it would mean nothing. It was too late. Martha, on the other hand, was watching her life unfold in a way that she could never have predicted. She was building a new world, a world where she had control, where her actions mattered. Every woman who walked into her mentorship program, every woman whose life she touched, was another testament to her strength. They were building their own futures, just as she had. She sat at her desk, reflecting on everything that had brought her to this moment. The phone calls she had ignored, the letters she had read but not responded to. They all seemed like distant echoes now, echoes of a life that no longer belonged to her. For a moment, she thought about the years she had spent trying to please her children, trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect person. But she had learned something important in her journey. She was enough, and her worth was never tied to the approval of others, not even her children. She picked up the phone to call Bradley. "It's time," she said simply. He didn't need to ask what she meant. "We'll take care of it," he replied. David and Lily's lives continued to spiral downward. Their attempts at reconciliation had been met with the cold silence of a world that no longer believed in them. They had lost Martha, not just as a mother, but as a force they could never control. The legacy she had built without them was untouchable, and they were left standing in its shadow, unable to reclaim what they had lost. Martha's success was no longer just about her. It was about every woman who had found the courage to rise, to choose herself, to build a life that was their own. And as the months passed, her nonprofit reached new heights, expanding its reach globally. Martha had done it. She had created a legacy of independence, of hope, and of empowerment. For the first time, she felt at peace. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, had built something that no one could ever take from her, not even the children who had tried to define her worth. And that was a victory she could live with for the rest of her life. Martha sat in her office surrounded by stacks of paperwork. The soft click of her pen tapping against the desk was the only sound in the room. The weight of the decision she had made felt almost surreal, but it was exactly what she needed to do. She had spent years building her life, reclaiming her power, and creating a legacy that would outlive her. Now, with a few final legal steps, she was ensuring that nothing, no one, would ever stand in the way of her mission. She had established a trust in her name, a trust that would direct the vast majority of her fortune to causes that would empower women long after her death. Her wealth, the wealth she had earned through decades of hard work and careful planning, was now dedicated to furthering the cause she believed in most deeply: women's education, financial independence, and support for those who had been oppressed or overlooked. The trust was airtight, carefully crafted by Bradley and a team of experts to ensure no one, especially not David or Lily, could ever claim a cent of it. Her nonprofit organization, Empowerment for All, had already reached new heights, impacting millions of women globally. New programs were being launched in every corner of the world, and the response was overwhelming. Women who had once felt small, silenced, and disregarded were now finding their voices, their strength, and their purpose. Martha's message of self-worth and independence was spreading like wildfire, and it was no longer just her story. It was the story of every woman who had ever fought to be seen and heard. But as Martha's influence grew, so did the desperation of her children. David and Lily, now fully aware that they would never inherit what they had once expected, began making increasingly bold moves. They had been cut off legally from any claim to Martha's fortune, but that didn't stop them from trying to exploit their connection. They tried to challenge the trust, to find a loophole, anything that could give them access to the wealth they believed was rightfully theirs. David's financial situation had deteriorated to the point where he was now begging investors for money just to stay afloat. His business, once thriving, was now a shadow of its former self, and he had burned every bridge in the process. His name had become synonymous with failure. Lily, too, had seen her career spiral into oblivion. The contracts that once flowed easily through her hands now seemed like distant memories. The social circles she had once dominated had closed their doors to her, unwilling to associate with someone so publicly shunned. She tried to salvage what was left of her reputation, but it was clear to everyone who knew her that the damage was irreversible. Despite their best efforts to manipulate the situation, David and Lily were unable to gain anything from Martha's fortune. The legal walls she had built around her wealth were unbreakable, and every attempt to breach them was met with failure. They were nothing more than shadows in the background now, clinging to the remnants of a life they had once taken for granted. Martha's public announcement that a significant portion of her wealth would go to furthering women's education and independence was met with widespread applause. Her story, once one of rejection and betrayal, had become a symbol of resilience and self-reliance. She had not only survived, but had thrived in a world that had tried to push her aside. Her voice, once silenced by the expectations of others, was now heard everywhere. She was invited to speak at global conferences, to sit on panels with world leaders, and to serve as a mentor to countless women who saw in her the strength they had long wished to find in themselves. Her story had transcended her own life and had become a movement, one that was empowering women to take control of their futures, just as she had done. David and Lily, meanwhile, continued to watch from the sidelines, their resentment and regret growing with every passing day. They could see the world turning its back on them, and they knew it was because of their own actions. They had destroyed any chance of reconciling with their mother, and now, with no inheritance and no place in her world, they were left with nothing but the bitter realization that they had lost her forever. Martha's name became synonymous with empowerment and independence. Her books were bestsellers, her nonprofit flourished, and her legacy grew stronger with each passing year. Women everywhere were inspired by her journey, and her impact reached far beyond what anyone had ever imagined. As Martha looked out over the city from her office window, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had built something that mattered, something that would live on long after she was gone. Her life, once defined by others' expectations, was now a testament to her own strength, and the strength of every woman who had chosen to stand up and fight for herself. And in that quiet moment, as she watched the sun set over the skyline, Martha knew one thing for certain. She had done the right thing. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had created a legacy that no one, least of all her children, could ever take from her. The legacy of empowerment for all, of women who had found their voices, was Martha's true inheritance, and it would live on for generations. The grand hall was filled with a soft, reverent hush as Martha stepped onto the stage. Her eyes briefly scanned the sea of faces before her, each one expectant, looking up to her as the beacon of everything they wanted to become. Tonight, she was about to receive the highest humanitarian award, an honor that recognized her extraordinary work in empowering women, changing lives, and building a legacy that was as indomitable as her spirit. The applause began the moment she was introduced. The sound echoed, the crowd rising to their feet in appreciation. The weight of the moment settled over Martha like a warm, comforting cloak. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought through. She was no longer just the woman who had been discarded, who had been told she wasn't enough. She was the woman who had risen, built something for herself, and become a force that the world could no longer ignore. The award itself was gleaming in her hand, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights. But it wasn't the award that mattered. It was what it represented: the years of sacrifice, the heartache, and the resilience. And, most importantly, it was the lives she had changed, the women who had found strength through her journey, who now stood tall because she had shown them how. She stepped to the microphone, her voice steady, unwavering. "I stand here tonight, humbled, but more than anything proud," she began, her words carrying across the vast auditorium. "Proud of the women who have found their own voices, their own paths. Proud of the lives we have touched together. And proud of the journey I've walked, a journey that began with rejection, but has led to this moment, where I am no longer a victim of circumstances, but the creator of my own legacy." The crowd erupted into applause again, but Martha's eyes had already moved beyond the stage. She could see David and Lily sitting near the back of the room, their faces hidden in the shadows, far removed from the spotlight they once had in her life. Their eyes were fixed on her, expectant perhaps, hoping that some part of her would still recognize them, still want them in her world. But Martha was no longer that woman. They were no longer a part of her story. The memories of them, of their rejection, their indifference, felt like echoes from another life. one she had long since walked away from. She had once thought that their approval, their love, would be the key to her happiness. But now, she understood that happiness had to come from within. And she had built that happiness, piece by piece, on her own terms. As Martha spoke about her nonprofit, Empowerment for All, her voice grew even stronger. She spoke of the scholarship programs, the mentoring initiatives, the safe spaces she had created for women everywhere. Each program was not just a step toward financial independence for women, it was a step toward freedom. Freedom from the constraints that society had placed on them. Freedom from toxic relationships. Freedom to choose their own paths. Her nonprofit, now an international movement, had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when women empowered each other. And it was only just beginning. With each new initiative, with each new program, Martha's influence grew. She was no longer just a figurehead. She was the heart of a global revolution. The media covered her success extensively, from documentaries to magazine spreads. She had become an icon, a household name synonymous with self-reliance and empowerment. But in the background, David and Lily's lives were spiraling. Their desperate attempts to reclaim even a shred of the life they had once lived were falling flat. Business deals they had tried to revive failed. Investors, once eager to work with them, had pulled out, unwilling to be associated with people who had turned their backs on their own mother. Their reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. David's firm, once the pinnacle of success, now crumbled. And Lily's career, built on manipulation and image, had imploded. Martha, on the other hand, had flourished. Her foundation was thriving. Women in every corner of the world were finding their voices through her work. And as the months passed, her story became not just a tale of personal triumph, but a movement that inspired generations. Her name was now mentioned alongside other great humanitarians, and her book, Shattered Boxes, was studied in universities as a model of financial independence and breaking free from societal expectations. David and Lily had tried to reach out, to apologize, but their apologies now fell on deaf ears. Publicly, they admitted their mistakes, but the world saw them as opportunistic. The media, once so eager to give them a platform, now turned their backs on them as the public's sympathy shifted entirely toward Martha. No one wanted to hear their story anymore. They had burned every bridge, lost every connection, and now they were left with nothing. Back in the quiet of her office, Martha looked out at the city below, her reflection mingling with the view. She had built something greater than herself, something that would continue to grow long after she was gone. She had found peace, knowing that her work, her legacy, would live on for generations, far beyond the reach of those who had once tried to control her. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a new interview request. She smiled softly, but this time there was no excitement. No need to prove herself. She was already everything she had ever wanted to be. Her legacy was already in motion. As she set the phone down, she couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The life they thought they could take from her, the future they believed they could control, had slipped through their fingers, just as they had slipped out of hers. Martha stood from her desk, her eyes scanning the room where so much had been built. "They thought they could break me," she whispered to herself. "Instead, I built a life that they can never touch, a legacy that will outlive them both." With that, she turned to the window, watching as the city stretched out before her. It was a life of freedom, a life of her own making, and nothing, no one, could ever take that away.